What is my ideal weight? It's a question so many of us ask, but often it comes with underlying deeper thoughts and emotions. Is it just a number on the scale? Or is it tied to something more, like our sense of worth, or the ever-present question many women quietly carry, am I really enough? In this episode, Rhona joins me, who has released 25 pounds and maintained her progress. But our conversation didn't start there. A few months ago, Rhona found herself wondering if she was truly at her ideal weight. That question opened the door to a much bigger conversation, one about body image, self-acceptance, and how we define success on the journey of weight mastery. So join Rhona and I as we dig into the layers beneath the number and explore what ideal weight really means, physically, emotionally, and personally. So come on in. Did you know that our struggle with weight doesn't start with the food on your plate or get fixed in the gym? 80% of our weight struggle is mental. That's right. The key to unlocking long-term weight release and management begins in your mind. Hi there, I'm Rita Black. I'm a clinical hypnotherapist, weight loss expert, best-selling author, and the creator of the Shift Weight Mastery process. And not only have I helped thousands of people over the past 20 years achieve long-term weight mastery, I am also a former weight struggler, carb addict, and binge eater. And after 2 decades of failed diets and fad weight loss programs, I lost 40 pounds with the help of hypnosis. Not only did I release all that weight, I have kept it off for 25 years. Enter the Thin Thinking podcast, where you too will learn how to remove the mental roadblocks that keep you struggling. I'll give you the thin thinking tools, skills, and insights to help you develop the mindset you need, not only to achieve your ideal weight, but to stay there long term and live your best life. Sound good? Let's get started. Hello, you. Come on in. And don't be shy. Have a seat. I am recording this just before Memorial Day weekend. This will be dropping next week after the holiday. And right now we are heading into a heat wave here in Los Angeles. I hope it doesn't last too long. I have the fan going, but it's rather hot in my office where I'm recording this. And I'm just too cheap to turn on the air conditioner. I'm probably going to have to break down and do it at some point in the next couple of days, but I'm holding out. So the thing I have to look forward to this Memorial Day weekend, because I will probably be working on something, is my first tomato of the season, which is always super exciting. All these tomatoes have been green because it's been so cold, but since it's heated up, I see one of my tomatoes is getting a little red, and it's so exciting. You know, when you're excited about your first tomato of the season, I don't know if that's a good thing or that's a bad thing. But anyway, I sat down just today with the lovely Rhona Fiddler, who at 70 is an accomplished businesswoman, a mother, a grandmother, an amazing human being, and who has released 25 pounds and probably a lot of additional baggage with the Shift Weight Mastery process. And we're diving into her story, but we also dive deeper. And we talk about ideal weight and self-worth and how those two things can be subconsciously intertwined and how this can impact our finding and remaining at what we deem our ideal weight. So I hope you enjoy our conversation. Now, before we dive in, and in addition to the heat wave, I have a triple threat summer promotion of my Shift 30-day hypnosis-based self-study program, 30-day process that has hypnosis, coaching, and meditation every day. It also has an extensive preparation process that you can do in your own time. So you don't have to start right away. The self-study program you get access to for quite a long period of time. So even if you enroll now, you don't have to start right away. You can hold on, till after 4th of July or after August. You can do it in your own time frame. But why it's a great time to enroll is the price is discounted. You get an additional program with some amazing hypnosis downloads that get into exercise and portion control, stress management, even drinking less while releasing weight. And also, you will get to partake in either the upcoming fall 2025 live shift, which day one will be September 26th, for those of you who've been asking. And, or if that doesn't work for you, the spring 2026. Wow, that feels so weird saying that. But yeah, so you could enroll today, go through the self study, also enjoy the live, and then also the benefit of the discounted price and the additional program. So lots and lots for very little. So the link is in the show notes. Go check it out. And now let's join Rhona.
Can you hear me okay and everything?
I can. Hey, Rhona. Welcome to the Thin Thinking podcast. You're coming through loud and clear. It's lovely to have you here today. Thank you for coming on and having this conversation with me.
Thank you for having me. I am truly honored to be part of the conversation. So thank you.
Yeah, so everybody knows our background. Rhona's been in my community, but also been a shifter for a while, and we'll let her speak about that. But she and I were in a conversation not long ago, and the topic of weight and ideal weight came up, and we got into a very fascinating conversation. And so we decided, well, why don't we share this conversation with everybody? Because I think it's worth, exploring all of these ideas. But I love Rhona to share her own weight struggle story with you all, just sort of as a background for our conversation, and also just so she can offer her inspiration of, how she was able to manage to not only release weight, but now you've been keeping it off for a couple of months. But I'll shut up and let you talk about your struggle story, Rhona.
Sure, sure. So I will say that I think of myself, I was never fat, but I was
Mhm.
always solid and
Mhm.
sometimes maybe a little more chunky. It was really as I got into the teens when I started feeling heavy or heavier than I should be. Um, I grew up in the 60s and we're talking the Twiggies, like Peggy Lipton. I keep thinking of, they
Yes.
were tall, no hips, no thighs, like having that the space in between your thighs was like a thing, like growing up, right, when you
Right.
stood
I
there.
remember that, like you're supposed to see the sun shine through your thighs
Right,
or something
right,
like
like
that.
pulling them, like I never, I don't think I ever will, but that's a whole other
The sun never
conversation.
got through my thighs,
Uh,
that's for sure.
uh, I always had hips and I was just, and I always weighed more than I looked, but the number was like a big thing. And I tried, I mean, I did all of the diets, all the diets. And it was never, again, a ton of weight that I had to lose, but enough that I always felt bigger than I should be. And I think when I found you, I had started meditating on my own during COVID. So I'm not sure if I was just in the right frame of mind, what have you. It came across my feed. I decided to try the self-study, and then I did the live shift last spring, and it just clicked. Something about it
Mm,
clicked. And what I found interesting was like I've heard some others, share in some of your calls and what have you. At first, I fought against the writing things down, the calorie counting, the this sounds too
data
much.
tracking. Yeah.
Right, right.
Diet.
And then I realized I'm just gonna give it a try.
Yeah.
And when I let myself give it a try, it clicked for me. And I found that, the calories in were more than what I needed to, maintain my size, my weight, my energy.
Right. Yeah.
And that even though I felt I ate healthily, with, whole foods and not a, I ate a lot.
Yeah.
And the number, and plus, between having kids and going through menopause and getting to a certain age, I'll be 70 this year, things slow down,
Yeah.
and I was finding myself at a number and that was higher than one I had been at for a forever, other than being pregnant with my kids.
Mhm.
And the clothes I had were, like I was in extra larges and, which for me was big, was very big. And
Yeah.
it just didn't feel good. So I did the shift and I took it slowly. That's the one thing I would say to, a half a pound a week was
Yeah.
I was not going to starve myself. I was not going to feel deprived. I
Yeah.
wanted this to last. And it literally took me about a year, and I've lost 25 pounds. And I am in, sizes that feel really good. And I'm comfortably there. It's not like, oh, if
Yeah.
I might be able to like fit into that size 8 now. It's like I fit into like I'm a size 8, which is
That's
like
great.
amazing
That's
to say.
amazing. Can I
So
say something
I'm there.
about where you're at right now? Like what you just mentioned, because I did want to touch upon a couple of things because you said you had about 25 pounds to release and that you had gone through menopause and that you were eating healthfully and the whole idea of like tracking and calories and all of that. I think what's really interesting for somebody like you who is not overweight, like by 30, 40, 50, 60, 80 pounds, that as you get to that number closer to your, whatever, and we're going to be talking about ideal weight, but like precision does matter, like as you get closer, like when you have a substantial amount of weight to release, you can release weight but as and the data part and the menopause part, because women, I think they know their bodies slow down, but they don't know how much. And it varies from woman to woman. But I think just getting that reset and as you were saying, like just eating healthfully sometimes isn't enough. You've got to get the clarity. You've got to just get really clear. And data tracking, or what people will call calorie counting from the old school, like diet days, right? Like and it makes you think of like your bean counting and you're like scrimping and like, oh, and the calorie counting, and so, rather than being scientists about it, which is how our approach is in using the brain to take us out of emotional mode into more cognitively correct sort of like rational thinking so that we can use our brain. So Rona was saying all of this, and what clicked for her, my guess, is that you got clarity, and you got and when you get clarity, you also get alignment, meaning like, oh, okay, this is what my body does. I can now I have some choices. And you chose to release a half a pound a week because you started to come at this from a more loving, like, I don't want to deprive myself. I want to thrive down the scale. And so I think that was I just wanted to pause there and just kind of point out a few distinctions about you and your story and what if somebody's struggling and they're, like postmenopausal or they're in menopause, and it's just like, don't shy away from getting clear on things because I think the clarity really helps.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I remember I had a physical, and I was sure that there must have been something wrong with my metabolism, my thyroid, my something, because I was eating so healthy. And, I was putting on weight or I couldn't lose it. I was sure. And then when all of the tests came back and they were all good, and my doctor said to me, basically, like, you got to be careful about like how much and what it is, and
Yeah.
you said the data collection was really eye-opening for me. That was really eye-opening for me. And then, going from there to the realization that God willing, I'm gonna, live this next year one way or the other. So I can take my time. And this is going to be a new way of being. That's the other thing. It's like I didn't want to be on a diet,
Yeah.
like like you have oftentimes said, it's like, because the diet, it's a thing and then it's over and then you go back. It's like I've changed how I approach food, how I manage my relationship with food. It's still an ongoing thing.
Yeah,
And I think we'll get into some of that with some of the other issues, but I'm much more aware and realizing like I don't need as much. My
yeah,
body just doesn't need as much. And so it's been a journey. It's been up and down, but overall, like that path was basically exactly that half a pound a week. It took me
that's amazing.
year. I've lost, like I said, 25 pounds, maybe even a little bit more over the last couple of months, but I've been maintaining it now for, I'd say, for 4 or 5, well, probably 5 going on 6 months. And I feel like I can do it this time, that this is going to be lasting. So I'm
Right. Yeah. And do
very
it, meaning be it, because you're being,
yes.
yeah. And now, how much physical activity did you add in that year, or did you not? Because I know you were physically active beforehand, right?
Yeah, I would say that didn't change a lot.
Okay.
I've always been pretty active, although uh, I again I'm tracking it, so I just am aware I'm a big walker. I walk a lot, and I've started adding a little bit of strength training. I think I told you my goal is to do a chin up by the end of this year.
Yes, I love that. I want to
So,
have that goal too. That's a good
um, you pull up, or I guess a pull up is underhanded and a chin up is overhanded, and the underhanded is a little easier. So I'll go with that one. But something about feeling strong and having muscles like that is as much a part of my journey as the releasing the weight to
Mhm.
feel whole and aligned and like my shift word is strength. There's something about strength, some inner strength was resonated with me. So
Oh,
that's
I love that.
that's kind of more of my goal in this phase of my life to try to stay strong and healthy, in this last,
Don't say
this
last.
later act. I won't
I
say
don't,
last,
yeah,
later
the
act.
next chapter of your life. I did were you maybe you weren't on the call where I was talking about this 105-year-old woman on YouTube. And if you guys are listening to this, just go 105-year-old interview. And it's just fantastic. This woman is like so full of life. And I know, Rona, your mom's 93, and you're probably shocked to think, oh gosh, could my mother be on this earth for 12 more years? And maybe she could. Maybe this woman is pretty healthy, very mentally all there. And she was in, and when you said last, and I was like, she said something that just was so awesome, which was the guy who was interviewing her is some 20-something-year-old, and he's interviewing a lot of older people. He's actually a really good interviewer. But he asked her, if you were 50, like when you were 50, when you were 55, like if you were like, what would be your advice to like a 50-year-old who worked in a bank, who wasn't really happy with their job, like who wanted to be a singer or a dancer or like, would you tell them it's too late? And she was like, why would I say it's too late? They've got their whole life ahead of them. I just, I just love that.
Yeah.
So it's all perspective, it is.
Yeah.
And a lot of, I think, what we're going to talk about with weight is perspective and who's looking at it and who's saying what. So yeah, 70, I think you're just looking at being strong for your next chapter, which I think is a
Yes.
very good idea.
Yes. So, you talked about the weight, and one of the things, when I lost the 25 pounds and I got to this number, and we had our conversation, and it was like, what is am I at my ideal weight? Like, I don't know,
Yeah.
what is that ideal weight? I know I feel good right now, but if I looked at like the charts, that number's still higher than a lot of those charts would
Yeah.
show in terms of, for me, for whatever, I don't know if it's what I grew up with, but it was sort of like from 5 feet on up, it was like 100 pounds at 5 feet and then 5 pounds
Yes, that's the
every inch.
insurance chart, and that
Okay.
yeah, and that is, yeah, an old standard. I don't
Right.
think
So, but that's certainly one that would play in my head, and I'm
yeah,
higher than that. So it was kind of like,
right,
should I be working on getting down even a little lower?
yeah,
And, so I struggled with that a
yeah,
lot. And then it was you who said, just, relax, like sort of stay where you are, see how that feels. And you also talked about getting to a point where it was like, how did you put it? Almost like make sure that like you could be where you are and eat comfortably and feel
yeah,
comfortable. And that was real eye-opening to me.
yeah,
Like coming to that and realizing, wait, yes, I want to be at a point where I don't feel like I am again starving or working so hard to
yeah,
get, that I'm eating comfortably, healthily. I'm, like I said, I'm fitting into clothes. I feel good. Like, why should I care so much about that number?
yeah, and I think that number, if is a haunting number, and, I think probably a lot of our listeners know those numbers, like the 100 pounds and then 5 for every inch above that. And the interesting thing is, from birth until we're in our 20s, everything our parents, teachers, life experiences get imprinted on our subconscious mind. And so I hear that a lot because I work with a lot of women 55 plus. And it's so interesting to me when somebody is approaching like their ideal, like or some number. And I was like, well, where did you get that number from? And for most people, not most people, but I would say half of them, it's random. It's just like, oh, it's just sounded like a good number. It had nothing to do with reality, with their BMI or and again, those external measuring sticks, even BMI, they're saying, well, now they've adjusted and made an older person's BMI. But like when I used to back in the very beginning of my career as a hypnotherapist and working with weight management, I would weigh people. And when they come in, so we could measure their progress. And then I was like, this is stupid. Like, why am I? They need to do if they want to measure their data, then they do that themselves. So they have ownership. I don't want to be their mother, and I don't want to be, and I don't want to have any judgment about what their weight, like so. Um, but what was interesting, and you and I were talking about this just before we turned on record, was you could be a a tiny person and weigh like I could look at you and go, well, they probably weigh this because when you weigh enough people, you get a pretty good sense of what people weigh. But they would weigh maybe 20 pounds heavier because they were just dense as a person. They just like their bodies were dense, their muscles were dense, but they appeared to be, optimal or they healthy. And then there would be somebody who was appeared much heavier, but they would weigh less. So like all these like external, internal indicators and how we're measuring ourselves and everything, it's just so I think a lot of it gets imprinted and you and I were talking about like, our mothers, our and how they measured us and how our fathers measured us and our culture measured us. And you grew up in the 60s, I grew up I was born in 64 and I grew up in the 60s and 70s and both of us, like I remember looking at my classmates and they, their thighs fit into the chairs at school and mine were like hanging over. And it's like we were talking about this, yeah, that space between your legs. Like it's
Between the
just
legs and like no matter how thin I get, I don't unless I have liposuction or surgery, I don't think I'm ever going to have that space in between my thighs because I'm just not built like that. But
yeah.
that was
And
another thing that, like you pointed out, that loving yourself down the scale, like recognizing this is my body and my body shape.
mm,
And like that's who I am. It's
yeah,
okay.
that was such a shock to me too, was when I was growing up, I thought, well, if I lost enough weight, I would like magically have the long legs and the long arms. And, I had this vision. It was so funny because I was listening to the Partridge Family the other day on Spotify. I was like, oh my God, the Partridge Family is on Spotify. And I had such a crush on David Cassidy. And I used to dream that because I didn't feel good enough in my own skin, I really did. I just like loathed myself. I had this dream of like unzipping myself, and the me was the external cover, and then I would step out as this tall blonde, because blonde was so big in the 70s, right? Long haired, skinny woman that David Cassidy couldn't resist.
I'm right there with you because I went to college out in California and I ended up graduating from a college in Michigan. But I joke that like I thought if I stayed there long enough, I would turn into a California girl with the long blonde hair and straight. And I mean, I have curly dark hair. It's gray now, but I have, like I said, I've always had hips and thighs, and it's just. I'm just not going to be that
Right.
California, again, I always say Peggy Lipton because in was it the Mod Squad? That was sort
Yeah.
of the ideal,
It was
but
so cool. Yeah.
so cool. But the other thing too that we talked about, which I realized that drives me, that is this sense of, okay, forget sort of the number that I'm at, the number that I lost. And the
Hmm.
sense that that's not enough. Other people
Mm.
can lose more.
Yeah.
And this sense of, oh, and again, I don't know if it's a competitiveness, if it's a low self-esteem, if it's where it comes from, but the sense of, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't try to lose 25. Like it might be better to lose 30,
Yeah.
and then I have a little cushion. And then I even look at 30 and think, well, according to the numbers, I could lose 35 pounds and still be at a healthy number. I wouldn't be like, you know, too thin. So maybe I should really be looking to lose more
Yeah.
because other people can.
Yeah.
And like, if they can, I should be able to. And I
There,
realized I was surprised by how much that,
yeah, that voice. Well, I would love to, I want to talk about two things. So that totally is, the human brain will never be satisfied, until we make the decision, like that our ego will go, I can do better, I can do more. And that's why so much of us struggle, because we'll get to that ideal weight or the weight that we wanted. And then, well, as you and I discussed, there's something more there. There's like, I'm not enough, so there's that underlying sense of, is it really your weight, or is it that, and a lot of times when we diet, we aren't loving ourselves down the scale, so we are getting to our ideal weight and we still don't love ourselves, and so we think, then I therefore I need to be thinner, because when I'm truly the perfect weight, I will love myself and I will grant myself permission to love myself. But uh, as we find out, and so that's why so many people get to that ideal weight, have imposter syndrome, and then they're like, then they start stress eating, or they'll and then they're going to gain the weight back. um but just going back to, I wanted to address that, I love the fact that you kind of were, taking it slow, half pound a week, because again, when we are struggling, we just want to get the weight off as quickly as possible. But with the shift, we're really focused on like, no, own yourself as you are, so you can, really enjoy. And something that I think you probably know this, Rona, but when I released my own weight, I released 10 more pounds than I am now. And then, but I realized pretty quickly that wasn't sustainable. Like that just wasn't sustainable. And so it was a little hard to gain some of that weight back, but it was like, I want to normalize where I feel right. And so when people ask me about ideal weight, I'm like, I think ideal weight is where you feel like, the size that feels good, but also that you are able to sustain yourself without feeling like you're, starving or deprived, that like, wow, that we have this term, creating a life that that allows you to, that you love, that allows you to live at your ideal weight. And ideal weight, I think, is that place. So I think until you own yourself, or you start to have that love yourself down the scale, I don't know that you have that ability, because we're coming from so much self hate and all of those voices haunting us. Because where are those voices coming from? Like when you were judging yourself, like, oh, well, I got to do 35. And like, one, I think there is an innate sense of competition with women, and that doesn't need to be there, but it's just like, I think we were brought up in this time. I don't think my daughters, and I don't know if your children have the
Mhm.
same measuring stick, but I think our mothers definitely ingrained in us, like, if you manage your weight, you have discipline, you have willpower, and you are enough. Like a woman who, like, there's just this kind of unspoken, and maybe sometimes spoken out loud, because I have a lot of clients who mothers, locked refrigerators and,
Oh,
really
wow.
restricted them. Um, and or fathers who were like, you got to lose some weight, nobody's going to love you if you're not the right weight, like all that messaging that we get when we're younger, that really imprints deeply. And I think in the 70s, there was that idea of like, a real woman, manages her weight, and she's thin, and she looks this particular way, and she dyes her hair, well, she has perfect hair, and blonde hair probably for the most part, right? And as we grew out of that time, but it still lingers. I mean, I think a lot of us, because we were so imprinted from that time.
Well, I think so. I agree. And I think part of that with our generation in particular, you talk about like the messaging we got. It was, I think about that commercial. What is it? You can bring home the bacon and cook it up in a pan, right?
Right up in the pan.
Right. You
Yeah.
could do everything. So it's like on one hand, growing up with the message, kind of this, I feel like I was at this point, and we probably both were sort of straddling two really
Yes.
distinct societal messages.
Yeah.
On one hand, it was the message of the perfect homemaker, the Donna Reed, the pearls and the dress, and I
Yeah.
mean, I can picture that. And then on the other hand, it was the bra burning, you can do
Yes.
anything, and that message came very strongly, that you could be anything, you could do anything, which almost made it feel like whatever I did wasn't enough because I could be even more, right?
Right.
So, and I think that message just permeates in such a way that, again, it's like, oh, back to weight, like
Yes. I could do
losing this,
better.
I could be even better, right? I could be even stronger, even more strict, even more
Yeah.
self
Disciplined.
disciplined. Thank you. Yes, yes. And man, those messages are really strong, really
Yeah.
strong. And, for me, it would come out too, I think, in this, in how I ate and what I ate, and, and
And beating yourself up if you didn't eat the right thing.
right, right. And then, and the number. And I know I have many friends, and we struggle with this, the same kind of thing, with that sense of, not being enough somehow.
Yeah.
I have friends who were, stayed at home, and it wasn't enough because they should have been out working. And I have,
Yeah.
friends who were out working, and it wasn't enough because they worried about the kids. It's like, I know that there's still some of that, but, for me, it was a big struggle with, what am I going to do? And, also expectations depending on, I was always an achiever, maybe an overachiever. And so it was, great things. I was destined to do great things. So it was always this sense of the bar is so high, both in what I do and how I look and how I do. And,
Yeah.
point, even now, I feel like, oh my God, I thought by now it'd be figured out, right? Like I could relax, and it's still there, but
Yeah.
yes, I'm figuring it out a little bit more. And that's where I think that self-reflection, the meditation, for you, the hypnosis, some of the different
Yeah.
remessaging, repatterning those
Yeah.
things, but those neural pathways are strong.
Yeah, well, I think the neural pathways, but also our central nervous systems. And we get reactionary, like, we get on the scale and there's that reaction, that visceral reaction that sometimes goes beyond our thinking. It's just like trigger, like it's PTSD. You get on the scale and it's up, and then it tripwires an entire neural, internal nervous system response. That doesn't feel rational because we can say it's okay, it's only 2 pounds, but it triggers all the old pain, all the old self-abuse, all of it it's kind of, we take a bath in it. One thing that I could say, like as a tool for our listeners, in addition to what Rona's saying, like hypnosis or meditation, would be to um, really work on gratitude, and not intellectual gratitude, meaning like having a gratitude list, but meaning like I've gotten into this ritual and I love it in the morning of just being grateful and feeling that gratitude in my body and holding it for as long as I can, right? Like stretching out, like, those moments when you're like, all is well with my world. They don't come that often, but when you do, there's a mental exercise of just like holding on to that feeling and stretching it out, because our brains will always say it's not enough and we're not enough. They say, I think I have this client, he cracks me up so much. He's not a weight client. He came for smoking many years ago and then he quit smoking, but he's a businessman, and he is a very good businessman. He lives in Beverly Hills, and he lived in like a home that was worth 2 or 3 million dollars, like a nice home, nice family, has everything. Not good enough, right? And I'm not good enough because he has a very low self-esteem, although he's a very successful guy. And I see him, and then he was like, Rita, I want to buy that. He owns like a Lamborghini. He has to literally sit in his Lamborghini in the morning to get it up to go to work in the morning, like, because he hates his job, but he makes a lot of money. And he's like, I just bought the $20 million mansion that I've been dreaming about for the last 5 years. So, and he feels really good, right? And then I hear from him 6 months later. He's like, Dr. Black, can you call me? And he's like, I'm so unhappy. I'm so stressed out. And I was like, what happened to the 20 million? It's like, "Okay, now I have to keep it up, and now I have to do all this stuff." And I was like, yeah, that's kind of our crazy brain, isn't it? So working, and I really send him off on these like things like, let's work on the gratitude here, and like but that feeling in your body, like even working on my body, like loving my thighs, loving my, when we do the body work and stuff like that, just thinking about, my body shape is the body shape I am always going to have. And it's kind of a mourning process to let go, like, oh, I am never going to be that, the long-legged, long spindly arms, but I'll be the shape I am, and my shape is good enough, and I am enough. But I feel like, so in the morning, like I'm grateful for things like my health, and I just hold that feeling, because it gives me that deeper sense of like, it's enough. Like my life is as probably good as it's going to get right now. Like I'm healthy, my kids are healthy. Like those are the things I'm like, my kids are healthy, my husband's healthy, I'm healthy, I have a roof over my head. That's good. That's a good starting point, and feeling that fully has helped me really feel like, wow, I'm good. Like this is as good as it's going to get. I don't know. What do you think?
No, I hear you. I also have found myself doing more and more of that kind of a practice. Absolutely. But like I said before, it still surprises me that at this point in my life,
Yeah,
how much those other things are still there. It's just
they haunt us.
they do. I have up on, I'm looking on my bulletin board, a saying, it's comparison is the thief of joy.
Mm,
And it's, I have to remind myself that because when I'm not comparing, then I'm much more comfortable. Like, yes, I have an abundance. I'm good. I have, like, again, my health, my family, my, roof. I have more than a roof.
Yeah.
I really truly have more than I need.
Yeah.
But compared to other people that I know, that I love, I mean, they have more
Right. Yeah.
stuff, right?
Yeah.
And,
Yes.
and I think part of that is the challenge we live in our world, in our society,
Yeah.
especially in America. It's all about, building bigger and more and what have you.
Yeah. And it's reflected in our feeds because our feeds just feed back our world to us
Oh,
on
yes.
steroids.
And now, like, I think for today's generation, I mean, we had some challenges, but now today's generation, with all the social media and all of that, that whole
Yeah.
sense of comparison and, feeling like you're not enough because others are out there doing these great things, or even, again, at this age, I think, yeah, I'm pretty strong and healthy and would fit. But then I look at, I now get these feeds of these other women who are close in age, who are even fitter, right? Who are even, right, stronger, who are showing me that, they're doing, and it's like, I've
Yeah.
tried to cut a lot of that out, but if like it's all there, you're just bombarded with it. And it becomes more and more critical to take the time to do that self-reflection, to be really focused on you. Um, I even go back again to the numbers. You talked about how a body can be a different body type. I have literally been in doctors' offices where I've gotten on a scale and a nurse will go like, "Oh, you don't look like you weigh that much." And it's like, "Oh, great. Like that's just what I
Um,
needed to hear, right?"
yeah.
Um, but but I'm one of those people I'm like denser. And I used to joke that my kids when they were little, they were solid. Like you'd pick them
Mm,
up, they were dense. I had nieces that I felt like I could pick them up and would could throw them across the room. They were just lighter, you
right.
know. But
Yeah.
it's the build. Like I haven't done it, but I'm very curious. Like, there are the scales and stuff that do the measure the muscle mass and the
Yeah.
things of that sort. I'd be curious kind of how it measures up. Um,
Mhm.
because I do have a sense that, like I said, I do, thankfully for me, I build muscle quickly. I have a feeling like I might be more dense or muscular that way in how I'm
Right. You're probably more of a mesomorph, which is like the athletic build, right?
right. And, again, I'm never going to be, I would read, I'm, never going to be 5'7", which is what I am, and 115 pounds or, 110,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
And
like I would read the models, the supermodels, growing
right.
up, that was like, I'd read about all of
How
their
can they be
heights.
like 5'12" or I'm sorry, five foot
Yeah,
11,
5'12".
5'12" and weigh, 110 pounds? Like, what?
Right,
How can you
right.
do that? But no, it's fascinating, and we have I don't know, like if you got it externally when when you were growing up. But I remember really distinctly, I was a coat check girl in a fancy, well, it wasn't fancy, it was a steakhouse, a famous steakhouse in New York City called the Old Homestead. And I was the big girl, and there were all these thin girl. I actually worked with Molly Shannon, the comedian, and she
Yeah.
was a coat check girl. She was hilarious. She was always hilarious. She would sit there and pull like little mink furs out of the mink coats because people would come in from it was New York City on the west side in the meatpacking district. And it would, on a Saturday night, it would be from all these the bridge and tunnel crowd, they were called, because they come in from New Jersey and Queens and Brooklyn, and with their mink coats and their Burberry coats, and people had money, and we'd sit and like she'd pick all the mink out of it. So if you go to the homestead, don't check your coat with the coat check girl, but a mink. But the owners had no problem. They were overweight men, these two guys, and they talked like this. They talk, like they were kind of gangstery, and they would say, "Honey, honey, if you would lose a couple of pounds, like if you would lose like 20 pounds, oh, I could get you a boyfriend. Like I could get you a boyfriend, like I didn't rate, like it's like, yeah, you can't get a boy, like you got to put a little more makeup on and you got to drop some weight. And then, and they're seriously telling me this, and they're standing there, they're probably 60 pounds overweight each themselves.
Yep.
But anyway, no problem telling me to lose weight.
Yeah. Yeah. And I get, again, we go back to societal influences, and as women, it's constant. I think, and I'm hoping things are slightly changing. I grew up dancing. I don't consider myself a dancer but I own a dance studio now. And um, there was certainly pressure to look a certain way. And it's funny because I look back now at pictures and I think, oh my God, like I wish I could be that shape. But even then, there was a pressure to be thinner,
Of
than what I
course,
was,
yeah.
especially in that environment. I think now I look and see, certainly in the commercial space, there are all shapes and sizes, way more variety in
Mhm.
shapes and sizes than there was growing up. I think um, in the company and, ballet companies or things, it's a little less so, but a little, there still is a little bit more variety, a little more meat
Yeah,
on some of these dancers' bones, which I love to
yeah,
see. And so I'm hoping, that some of the messaging, even with some of the celebrities and what have you, there's a little bit of a broader range, but it almost feels like it's kind of like you're either one or the other. There's not like
yeah.
this, they're either very
Like
thin or they're, a spokesperson for being a
big
bigger.
girl. Yeah,
Right,
yeah,
right. So
yeah,
it's tough. It's tough
yeah.
because those messages are all out there constantly bombarding us. And, I hope I, you know, gave my daughter different messaging, but, it's hard, and my granddaughter, but,
Did your
uh,
mother give you messaging? Did you get messaging from your parents at
I
all?
thought a lot about that. I have to honestly say, I don't feel like I got so much messaging about my weight.
Mm,
Um, it was more about, just being what I could accomplish just in general, that there were big
right.
expectations on
Okay. Uh-huh.
what I
Yeah,
could do and what I was going to be, that sort of
yeah.
thing. But my weight, not so much, although I do remember when I was younger a comment that my father made about, because I had a big bottom and that I
Mhm.
was like a half a mile behind myself, that I was always obviously that stuck with me.
Yeah.
And I must have been pretty young because he actually passed away when I was 13. So,
Oh,
it
wow.
was
Okay.
before that. So I'm sure there was some messaging, but I don't remember that as strongly as more maybe from like the dance environment and then peer pressure as I would say around that 12, 13 and older. That's when it really
Yeah,
started to hit for me, that I really began to notice that, like I said, I felt I was shaped differently. I used to have to
yeah,
go, I should more in the Missy departments because, they had pants that fit over my hips versus those teens, that were like
yeah.
straight.
Oh, I know. Like at the getting clothes back then at that age, if you had any sort of non-skinny body was horrible. Just
Mm-hmm.
horrible. I mean, I
And
remember going, yeah, into that. I ended up, I mean, that was the age of like sewing machines and making your own clothes. And I made a lot of
mm,
my own clothes just because couldn't
yeah,
find any.
that was not my strength, that like making sewing. No, but I did go, I couldn't shop in the junior departments. I still can't shop in the junior departments. And I remember going with my mom to like one of her stores. to get
Mm,
clothes, and it was like embarrassing. It's like,
yeah.
and now the styles, I think, span, you can get
Yeah.
youthful
You
stuff in
can,
all kinds of
yeah.
ranges.
And
But
that's what I love about certain brands too, like Athleta. I think that's how they pronounce themselves, but like they usually will show a
yeah,
style with a thinner model and then a heavier model. And so you get to see that perspective. And I like that. I appreciate that because I'm
yep,
probably somewhere in between. I'm not the
right,
super
right.
skinny model. But yeah, it's like the messaging that um I mean, I think we started this conversation really from that moment where you were like, "Is this enough? Is my weight enough?" And I was like, "Well, is this the right weight?" And it was like, maybe we're in the wrong conversation here. This is just like, am I really enough? And so because I want to leave everybody with like a sense of like where should we be looking when we talk about our weight? Like what, you know, I think it's valid to look to data and to look at um markers that might feel right for you if you there I mean and I certainly have a lot of people in my world who have never been at their ideal weight or don't know what that would look like. And so I feel like instead of looking at like some giving yourself some sort of random or insurance chart number, really to look at where you are and start to look at milestones versus like, I got to get to this number, but like, what would it feel like to release 20 pounds and then let me get there? And that can be my vision for the moment. How do I feel? What does this feel like? Okay, well, okay, I feel strong here because, we were having a conversation, the coaches from the spring shift. And it got Rhona, because I know you weren't in this conversation, but it got to this point because a lot of the coaches are at their ideal weight and some of them are near their ideal weight, but they're not sure. And so it did become the same conversation of like, can I be okay at this weight? Like, can I grant myself permission to just be okay? Because I kind of feel good and I kind of like eating how I'm eating right now. And
Mhm.
and it's this whole thing of like, could I dare to just be happy at this weight that,
Right.
maybe other people would deem, why would I want to be at that? Do you know what I mean? And I really think it's so much about permission, like granting
Completely.
ourselves permission.
Yes. Yes. And it's funny you said, because that was the other thing when we had our initial conversation that, there were a couple things. That was another one. It was like giving me permission to just be okay here was like, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I never thought of that. Like, yeah.
Yeah. Like
And
we're looking for permission from everyone and everything around us. And the
mhm.
idea of granting ourselves our own permission for whatever, not even just weight, but am I rich enough? Am I
Oh yeah. Oh
thin
yeah.
enough? Am I,
Am I
good enough
accomplished enough?
mother?
Am I smart enough? Am I, yeah.
Am I a good enough mother? Am I a good enough business person? Like all of that. It's like,
Mhm.
well, maybe who am I measuring myself against?
Right.
And it really is it just asking yourself. So for everybody out there, just to start to look at that and to ask question. I was watching this other or listening to another podcast with the Diary of a CEO, Stephen Bartlett, who's again another great interviewer, and he was interviewing this guy, and I don't even know this guy's name, but he was talking about working with billionaires. And he said, most billionaires I know are very unhappy people. Like most of them have compared, and tried to get better and try to make more money and everything, but they're still very, very unhappy. He said, my grandmother lived on Social Security and that was it. She had no money. But she was the happiest person he ever knew because she loved her garden. She loved her life. She had friends, she did her thing, and he said there's wealth, like when we think of wealth and we think of like wealth of mental health or wealth of the health, and now there's that saying your health is your greatest asset, especially above the age of 60. And I've started like thinking about that with all this compare and despair, thinking about like what's enough. And when my brain wants to go there, I'm like, how wealthy you are already in this area of your life. Like, let's look at what you've got. And then let's see, do we really need more? Do we really need this? Because our brain will just drive us crazy. So
Oh,
I
yeah.
think it's granting ourselves permission to set boundaries and say, yeah, that's enough. This is good for here. And I think what I said to some of those coaches, I was like, try it out. Just try out being at that weight for a while and see how you feel. Like, why not? And I think that's where you and I ended our conversation. It was like, just try out being at this ideal weight and see how ideal it is.
Yeah, and that is exactly. And as I think I shared, sort of when I let go of all of this angst over, is this the ideal weight? Should it be more? And I just gave myself permission.
Mhm.
I actually released a few more pounds. It was just, I
So
wasn't,
crazy. Yeah, it's so fun.
because it was, yeah. And like I said, thinking about it now, I have to admit, there are still moments that I think, oh, a couple more, and then there's, no, like I like this works. Like I eat
Yeah.
plenty, I am fit into clothes. I'm not having trouble fitting into clothes, and I like, yeah, like I'm looking good. It's okay. I can stay right here.
Yeah.
And
And I
be good
think the
with this.
longer you're there and the longer you kind of own it, then those things they do start to fall away. You know what I mean? Like all the questioning around that. And you do start to expand out into other areas. I know you're very expanded out into other areas of your life, but I just mean because we get so trapped in this weight world that holds a lot of thoughts and keeps us in a lot of thought spirals that own us versus us owning them. And I think becoming aware of them and then starting to name them and then starting to talk back to them, then you start to have some power over it. And then you're the owner of that conversation and it's not the owner of the conversation anymore. And I
That's a
think
really good way
that's
to
the
put it.
point we're getting to, where we can say, okay, yeah, there's that part of my brain that's coming from the lack and not enough. Thank you, part of my brain that does that. I'm going to give myself permission to be happy where I am today because it feels
Yeah,
pretty good, you
I
know?
think that's beautiful and, something for all of us to take away.
Yeah.
It's, yeah, giving ourselves permission to be okay with where we are, who we are
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
whatever place we are right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. And realizing that is an ongoing conversation. But at least to get to that point and to be able to be grateful and to own that, and
Mhm.
then to know that this brain of ours is always going to say, well, oh, look, there's another 70 70-year-old woman who's fitter, richer, whatever. It's like good for her. That's her thing, bringing yourself back to yourself. So that's a great point for us, I think, to finish up, just to say, yeah, let's give ourselves permission to be good in our own skin today because, also you don't know how much, more you get. So let's enjoy and
Amen.
and 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 enjoy being where we are and we are enough. All right, Rona,
I
thank you for
couldn't
this
agree more.
conversation. This was very, very cool.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, wow. I hope you got as much out of that conversation as I did. And I just want to thank you, Rona, for just saying yes to me because I said, Rona, let's take this and make it public because we had such a great conversation initially. And I said, would you be up for it? And she said, sure. So thank you, Rona, for being generous and vulnerable and joining me in that conversation, which I found really, really helpful. And don't forget, our summer triple threat promo isn't here for good. So it's going away soon. So visit the show notes and check it out. And have a great week. And remember that the key, and probably the only key to unlocking the door of the weight struggle, is inside you. So keep listening and find it. I will see you here back again next week. Thanks for listening to the Thin Thinking Podcast. Did that episode go by way too fast for you? If so, and you want to dive deeper into the mindset of long-term weight release, head on over to www.shiftweightmastery.com. That's www.shiftweightmastery.com, where you'll find numerous tools and resources to help you unlock your mind for permanent weight release, tips, strategies, and more. And be sure to check the show notes to learn more about my book, From Fat to Thin Thinking, Unlock Your Mind for Permanent Weight Loss, and to learn how to subscribe to the podcast so that you never miss an episode.